studies that have been done by developers, builders who have designed sites to the city's stormwater specifications. It is staff's opinion that a detailed study will be the best chance of minimizing the number of properties that could be added to the floodplain. Our engineering staff, Adam, Brad Mosier, Kevin Kuhl, and have done an excellent job over the years to manage development, to make sure that sites that have been developed are meeting our drainage manual. And we feel that FEMA needs to take that information into account when they develop the map.
So the two options you see, option one is, you know, the preliminary map potentially being adopted at some point or implemented by FEMA in the city. And option two is we're saying, you know, it may not be as accurate as it needs to be because we know of obvious mistakes or discrepancies on the map. Actually, option three, which doesn't exist, would be staff's preferred option, and that is to allow us to continue on with our existing management policies and practices because, you know, like Joe's reiterated here, our community has done an excellent job in floodplain and stormwater management over the years, and one of the things Joe's going to talk about is in our audits, we've never had a substantial finding or a substantial event in our community, and that's just saying that our planning and design processes exceed what a lot of other communities who have had severe flood damage, you know, have implemented. So there probably isn't an option three available to us by all indications from FEMA, but ideally, if we could proceed in any direction and it was our choice, we would just continue with the management practices that we have been using.
So why wouldn't we go with option two?
Okay, option two is it's going to take engineers, surveyors to actually, what I would call boots on the ground, to start at one end of the city. I think rather than using LiDAR, you know, to fly over the city, and I think the LiDAR can vary widely. As a matter of fact, one of the last lines in the HEC-RAS modeling software, it actually says, you know, be careful. LiDAR can vary widely. And I don't think that because of our urban area, cattails, structures, I think the LiDAR, the way it's drawn, does not take into account some of the management practices that we have used, such as large-scale detention ponds, some of those that I think you guys are more familiar. And when I started this process, Amy knows this, when we go somewhere, we tend to have to drive around a lot, but I've kind of done the same thing with the city. Some of the detention ponds are probably 30 to 40 years old. You know, some, when I started this process, I didn't even know existed, such as out at the state hospital grounds, where the doctors have bought the ground. I was out there about a month ago with Dave, and I said, geez, I didn't even know there was a large-scale detention pond out here. And so those are the things that I don't think they're taking into account. So that's why option two, I think, is a better option. It will cost money.
So it costs us money. FEMA does not pay for all the surveyors and engineers.
So there's the question that we're going to ask you at the end of this discussion is, FEMA preliminarily said that they would be responsible for that expense. But then as we started, you know, making the adjustments to the map, and it was apparent that there were more locations maybe than anybody would have anticipated where we feel the LiDAR information isn't accurate. We haven't heard a response back from them, but we're wondering if that offer is still on the table. And also, even if they do agree to pay for all of the boots on the ground type of work that would need to be done, there's still a substantial staff commitment to providing historical data from the city that we're hopeful that we have plan sets dating, you know, back to the 60s and earlier than that, but we might end up having to recreate some data for older stormwater management facilities that we have in the community. So that'll be kind of the final question is what does this body feel is the importance of moving forward at that point.
And Dave or Joe, can you tell me, kind of the so what? I mean, so what if we have our floodplain changes? What does that mean for people that own property that, isn't in the floodplain now, and regardless of what map we're using or whether we, work on the map to get it more detailed or whether we go with the LiDAR maps, what does that mean for the property owners?
Want me to answer? Okay.
I can do it.
Okay.
I mean, sure. So the so what is it means a substantial amount of money leaving our community. If all of the areas in red on that map that are being preliminarily marked as additions to the floodplain were adopted tomorrow, that would mean, based on our rough estimate, some 200 more properties in the community would be labeled as in or connected to the floodplain and therefore needing insurance. And obviously you understand how that insurance works when there's debt against property. The mortgage companies require insurances and things like that. So if you're talking about a couple hundred more properties, and the insurance rates or increases would vary. It could be $400, $500, $1,500 per property per year, a couple $100,000 in the community that our residents would end up spending on insurance that, from an economic development perspective, if we feel confident that we're doing a good job managing the floodplain, that's $200,000 that our residents could be spending on something else in the community or investing for the future in the community.
Even if there is an existing structure on there, that doesn't matter. It would still be classified floodplain.
Correct.
And everything, right?
Correct. And one of the things, and it's pretty clear, where FEMA's coming from a little bit on this is that there's been a number of catastrophic events, not in our area other than that 2011 flood down, and that was mostly upstream and downstream from us. Yankton was very fortunate in that respect, but East Coast, West Coast, Gulf Coast types of events that have really taxed their resources and made them much more conservative in how they consider what needs to be insured or what should be insured. You can insure anything, even if it's on the top of a mountain. You can buy floodplain insurance, but the certain areas that would be required to be insured, those areas in our region and subsequently, as other regions get into the risk management process, will be expanded in the country. So there'll be more people subject to the premiums.
One more question, I guess. I don't know if you'd have an idea, but do you have an estimate as to how much option 2 would cost? Oh, no.
Kind of moving on, and the next slide, facilities. We counted 57 detention facilities that we feel that FEMA has not taken into account. Some of them, again, you probably see is the Walmart detention area. Kirby Hofer has a pretty substantial detention area on Penina and Applewood Drive. And these are the things that we brought up to FEMA and that I think the detailed study would maybe take into account versus the LiDAR flyover. Just a little bit to reiterate what Dave said. Since 1978, when the inception of the National Flood Insurance Program came to Yankton, we have had 0 substantial claims. And FEMA defines a substantial claim as a structure being damaged by 50% or more of its assessed value. And I think that's a testament to how we have managed the floodplain, how our engineers in the past have required, detention when developers build. The reality of the additional floodplain mapping, as Dave said, will cost the Yankton property owners a substantial amount of money. The cost of floodplain insurance varies widely, so it is difficult to calculate the real cost. One of the things that does happen if a property is mapped in, newly mapped in, initially they get to buy flood insurance at a rate as if they were not in the floodplain. So it starts out fairly I'm going to say inexpensive, but they are eventually brought up to market value as if they were in floodplain. The floodplain insurance rates have changed a little bit since 2012. Everybody's rate used to be the same. The current way they do it is you are required to get an elevation certificate, and you're based on your lowest adjacent grade to the structure, and your rate is based on the elevation of your structure. The lower you are, the more you pay. The higher you are, the less you pay. The community assistant visit, or CAV, FEMA was here in 2015. They take a look at our flood development permits. They take a look at how we manage floodplain. The city currently has 28 flood insurance policies in place. We also have the same number of what we call map amendments in place. And when they were here in 2015, they actually gave us a letter stating that we were doing a very good job of managing floodplain, getting permits that are required. Kind of moving on. The next slide I just threw in there, and it's kind of a history of floods that have happened in Yankton. And Yankton is really, in 1957 was the last documented 100-year event.
And I might add that event was, sorry, Joe. that event was referenced in detail when we put together the Martin Creek Flood Mitigation Project, along with Dwayne when he was at District 3, and we packaged that project and got that project funded with a FEMA grant. And a lot of the raw data we used was from that event and what would happen as the Missouri River streambed continued to degrade, which actually helps our issues in the community. And if we cleared up that floodplain or that floodway, removed all the debris and everything from it, the volunteer vegetation, and got water out of the community faster, so we were prepared for water coming in from the west. What would those impacts be? So that event was a horrible thing in the community at that time, but was the basis for a lot of of the planning that we've done in the future. And it was a documented 100-year event, which is what all the design criteria are primarily based on, is determining 100-year events and their impact on properties.
And I just threw this slide in here as far as FEMA declarations. The last one was May 13th of 2011, and that had to do with the Missouri River flooding. But again, Yankton, we escaped a lot of the damage that was caused by the Missouri River flooding, and actually during that event we did not have a substantial loss defined by FEMA. And this is the last slide. It just kind of shows where we're at with the process. We started in June of 2016. Today we're kind of right in the middle of the process where the HEC-RAS models are being developed to model the floodplain, which again, our recommendation is that we do a detailed study. I think that is our best chance of accounting for some of the things that we have done as far as detention, retention, and some of our Martin Creek activities. The FEMA will be putting out bids for contractors to actually do the mapping and put the maps together, and that is going to start to take place in September of 2017. And after the maps are put together, and the process will continue through 2018, and at some point, kind of the ending part of the process, it's about a 6-month process where we'll have hearings with property owners. People will be able to give comments, and there is actually an appeals process where if the map is felt that it is wrong, FEMA does give a chance for cities, and individual property owners to appeal the map. And that's all I have. Any questions?
I have a question, Joe and Dave. With the number of counties that are listed up there, there's got to be a lot of other cities that have a lot less elevation than we have that are dealing with the same thing. What are they choosing to do? And where is that discussion going at the state level?
Okay, at the state level, right now, we are talking to different floodplain managers. Right now, that ball is just getting started. Just been thrown into the court. I think where we're at is I think there's not a lot of understanding on how this will affect communities. Some of the communities have been remapped recently, so some of their changes are not as dramatic as what ours are. For instance, Aberdeen, they had some flooding a few years ago, and their maps, and they actually, as part of their flooding, did do some detention on Moccasin Creek, but those discussions will continue.
So the other thing that's happening is that there are a lot of these counties and smaller communities that are just accepting as FEMA walks in and says, okay, this is your new floodplain, and some of them are pretty glad that there's some new data that they can work from. They don't have the background, the length of time that we've been dealing with the floodplain issues successfully, I guess, in the city of Yankton. So there's some communities that are just glad that FEMA has come and is presenting them with new information to work from their administration.
You said the city has policies out for flood insurance. Does this, with the new, what they're presenting, affect city-owned property? Any of the city-owned property? As far as, if we were to pass it as is, would our premiums go up because of it?
That's a really good question, but yeah, we would own property that would be added to the floodplain based on their new map, but most of it, I think, substantially is green space. I'd have to double check, but I don't know that we have any structures on parcels that are being proposed to add to the floodplain.
I'll just add to that a little bit. When we did the collector wells down by the river, everything was built, all the mechanical equipment, that was actually, we used the high river mark or the high water mark to set the habitable floors in those structures for pumps, electronic equipment. So yeah, we as this process continues, there are structures that we actually have to build in floodplain, and FEMA does allow you to do that. But we have taken that into account and made sure that if those structures do get flooded, such as the collector's well, they're made to be flooded, by the way. They're made to have water right up on it. As a matter of fact, we even have, at the doors, we even have a place to tie up a boat. So FEMA actually came down and looked at those as part of the cab visit the day they were here, and they were very interested in that, and they said, yeah, we're spot on in building structures like that. So that was a very calculated thing that we did.
If the commission chooses to go ahead and do more of a detailed study and expend some resources on engineers and surveyors, and their findings don't match what FEMA's found, and we submit something that looks a whole lot, I guess, better in terms of what our flood insurance impact would be to our residents, are they then, is there a satisfaction with that, or is there a risk that they would say, thanks for looking into that, but we're going to stick with what?
So that's one of the reasons we're here this evening with this being a work session, is that there could be a point in time, and again, this is evolving as we speak, but there could be a point in time where the commitment of some city resources, and a lot of that is going to just be staff time in addition to potentially some expenditures. The commitment of those resources may not end up paying dividends. The final determination may be different than than what we currently administer our floodplain based on. And our current floodway, floodplain location would be our goal to maintain. Again, as described earlier, we think we've done a really good job, and those that came before us did a really good job, and it's working well, but we could go through that process and not see any benefit to those resources expended. You would hope that wouldn't be the case, but that's very possible.
Bottom line is the National Flood Insurance Program is run by FEMA. It's their deal. They probably have the final say.
Just to understand the the conservative estimates that you have in here, average cost of 1,000 per site, $200,000 would be paid by property owners to FEMA. That's on an annual basis, right?
Correct.
That's not just one time.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and we're looking at, this is something that people would be stuck with for years to come. This is millions of dollars potentially leaving the community.
Correct. The last thing we want to do is not have somebody included in the floodplain that should be, but and that's FEMA's question back to us is, well, if there's an increased risk in these locations, they should be included, and we're not disagreeing with that. If there is an increased risk, those properties should be included or added to what we're administering. We just feel that through history and through our administration of the floodplain program that the current system suits us well, suits the city of Yankton well. But that's true. That'd be every year an ongoing expense for the residents of the community.
I'll just add to that a little bit. There is a process if you are in a floodplain and the map is wrong. There's what we call a letter of map amendment, and right now we have 28 letters where property that is currently has been mapped with our old map. We look at the base flood elevations. There is a form that the homeowner fills out. It actually has to be done by an engineer or a surveyor, and the letter map amendment is submitted to FEMA. They take a look at it and they either approve it or deny it. Again, 28 properties on the existing map have already been taken out. If things are correct, though, which I think we'd get a map that with a detailed study that would be closer to being accurate than if we just accept the LIDAR. I think you'll see a lot of people having to file for letters of map amendment, which right now I've been told that a letter costs about $1,200 to have that property pulled out of the floodplain.
Just one thing to add is whether property ends up in or out of the floodplain doesn't preclude them from buying flood insurance.
Right.
So if someone has property that they feel is at risk, they're certainly able to buy flood insurance, whether they're in or out of the flood.
Yeah. FEMA will. They making floodplain insurance available to somebody on, in the highest peak in the Black Hills. The insurance is available to everybody.
So are there properties like west of town, Riverside Acres, and maybe east along the James River that are they seeing expanded?
So yeah, the
territories?
county received a version of this map also that added property to to what they're currently managing as floodplain.
To expand on that a little bit there's actually a package of 7 maps that were sent out for Yankton County. They include Gayville, Vollen, Mission Hill, and some other rural areas in the county. But yeah, this is countywide.
Are there any places that you all can see when you look at our new map or the proposed map, which take properties out of the floodplain?
Yeah. Okay. So if you take a look at the map up here, there are some green areas that actually are going to be taken out from the existing map.
Okay, but there's a lot more being added in, it looks like, than, I don't see the colors between very well, but there's a lot more being added in than coming out.
There is very little green, unfortunately.
And the other thing is the red areas, a fair amount of those have development on them already, and some of the green areas that are coming out don't have development on them right now.
And that's one of the things too. We feel that FEMA is kind of coming to the game late. I mean, it would have been really nice if they would have identified these areas 10, 20 years ago. All of a sudden,
Right.
they show up, they do the LiDAR mapping, and they say, oh, yep, you have some areas that have an increased risk, and they feel that they should be added. And again, this is a draft map.
Right.
Things as they develop will probably change.
But there's more coming in that would require flood insurance if this map was approved or
Yeah,
accepted.
Correct.
I'd actually say that the areas have probably doubled.
And FEMA runs the flood insurance program.
Correct.
Well, I think based on what you've told us, we owe it to these property owners and the community itself for self-investment to try to correct the maps. So appreciate all the good work you've done all through these years to make sure we have adjusted for that.
Yes. This isn't something, again, that we asked for. As a matter of fact, I think when Dave and I first saw the maps, we were quite surprised, especially, going back to the number of claims that Yankton has had over the years. We've weathered, quite a few storms, quite a few events that we have come out because of the diligence that our engineers, as properties developed, studies that have been done by private developers over the years. So we feel, I understand that, FEMA, it's their insurance program. Ultimately, they probably have the final say on this, but I think we need to do whatever we can to minimize the expansion of the map.
And if Mother Nature decides tomorrow that there's going to be a 200-year event, there's going to be damage. I mean, there just is. So it's using your best judgment based on what we know historically and what's been implemented so far to try and reach a reasonable, area to be included in the floodplain.
So is there action for the commission to take, realizing not now, but at a future meeting, or will you just be recommending that we look for consulting firms to do this, or are we going to try to do this under our own auspices? I can't imagine we have time to survey the whole town again.
So we're waiting for FEMA at this point in time, and again, what they had presented to us last fall was that they would be responsible for employing the consultants, the surveyors and engineers that would do this process. In the meantime, we've heard a couple different descriptions of what that process would be, and that it may be just did I go the wrong way now? And that it may be just looking at specific areas that we thought there was a concern, as opposed to looking at the entire community. If there is no option 3, like I was describing earlier, which would be stay where we are now, and we land on option 2, we feel that it would be good to do the whole community, to take into account those 57 plus facilities that have been part of the development arc of our community historically. I don't know how FEMA is going to receive that. So the question short term for the commission is, do you see value if we get to that point where the city manager needs to make some small decisions on the front end that start expending resources? Do you see value in expending those resources, or do we want to, and obviously any larger contracts would come before the commission again, or there's some communities that are just going to accept a preliminary map as it's applied to the community and go from there?
And we don't even know what the costs are, what they could potentially be at this point. So that's something that would get addressed, and we'd be able to have some insight into that, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'm hopeful that FEMA will bear, the majority of those costs. I can't imagine a scenario where there wouldn't be some costs that would have to be borne by the city, and one of the largest costs might be the staff resources associated with recreating the past or the historic documentation, regarding those 57 locations. You know, there's probably 20 some of them we can go put our hands on pretty quick, but the other 30 of them are going to have to probably be mapped out and reconstructed in a design format to be applicable.
The other thing I'd like to just say a little bit more on that is some of the structures are old enough, the 57, that they may not function as they did when they were first built. So that may be another reason, you know, to do the detailed study.
Okay, anything else from the commission or from staff on how we're going to proceed? If not, it looks like our mayor returned, so I think we need a motion to adjourn, and then we'll have a break between meetings.
Entertaining a motion to adjourn the study session. Second. Motion is seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.